You could 1000% find another video on how to make an FPS character controller in Unity, and it'd probably be a good video. But I bet you won't find one on how to make your player dash, slide, fly, or swim. So that's what we're doing today. First, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Frank. I make games. I've been working for a while on a first-person sword combat game called Castle Wars. Working title. A couple of technology things. I'm using Fishnet for networking, which won't matter today. But if you want to see how to get this character controller networked and implement client-side prediction so players can't cheat, get subscribed. I'm also using Easy Character Movement 2 as a base, since I got that in a Humble Bundle and I've been using it for a while and I'm kind of familiar with it. Lastly, I just made a video setting up a lobby system, and I made a video prepping our character controller for split screen. Go check those out. Links are in the description if you wanna peep them. With all that out of the way, let's get into this. I'm going to start by copying the first person example from Easy Character Movement 2. It'll automatically handle walking, sprinting, jumping, and crouching, and this is going to be a very solid base for us to build upon. So with that out of the way, I'm going to set the max jump count to 2 because that's what I want for my character. I'm also going to set the sprint and walking multipliers to whatever feels best for me. And it's worth noting that I set the default gravity vector to 2.5 times Earth gravity, so that's whatever 2.5 times negative 9.81 is. Just because that's what felt best to me. I felt like the original gravity setting was a little too floaty. All of the features I mentioned at the beginning of this video are already examples in Easy Character Movement 2. Look at all of these. So why the fuck am I making this video? All of these features, as we'll see, are either implemented for third person or top down. They're also not implemented together. Every single one of these examples has a character controller which has just that one feature. I'm going to kind of take all of them, implement them in first person, and make a superset character controller that can do all of the things. And I'm going to get that ready for client-side prediction, which is going to be in a later video. So let's start with dashing. Okay, so this is what our dashing example looks like, and it's very akin to what you would see with, say, a platformer. It temporarily increases the player's speed and then brings them to a halt. And this would be perfect if we wanted to, say, jump to a specific point. Say if there was a floating platform and we wanted to jump up and then dash over. It'd be perfect for that. It's not set up very well for first person because I feel like that sort of starting and stopping motion would maybe make you motion sick. Let's get this implemented into our character controller. Okay, so for input-driven movement mechanics, there's 5 parts that we need to keep track of. There is the start, the stop, the is, the can, and the ing, or what we're doing while we're doing it. Start and stop are what we're going to call to keep track of the input. The state of the inputs and the state of the character are different, so we're going to need to keep track of them differently. The can is a Boolean function, which we'll use in conjunction with the input to trigger the start or the stop of the dash. And lastly, the ing is going to get called every simulation tick. So this will actually handle the movement or the simulation of the character during this movement ability. And this is where we are going to trigger the start and the stop of the actual movement ability itself. Side note, it's worth understanding that our character controller is split into 3 logical layers. The first is an input interface in which we're going to map controllers to. The second is where we're going to keep track of these inputs from the controllers. Since our character is going to be simulated on a fixed interval, we have to translate these events of the inputs starting and stopping into some continuous state. And our last logical layer is our character controller itself. This is going to contain the things that manage the character's state as well as all of our simulation rules for the character itself. This approach is kind of expandable or future-proof or whatever you want to call it, so that we can A, send inputs to multiple characters at the same time, and B, it allows us to save input states as frames, which we can then send to the server, and the server can authenticate that and make sure that we're not cheating. I'll be implementing client-side prediction, which is that anti-cheating stuff, in a later video, so get subscribed. I know I've said that like 3 times, but it's going to be pretty cool. So this is what our dash looks like. You can see that we are running. Boom. We get a little bit of a push. And you'll see that at the stop of our dash, or at the end of our dash, we no longer halt the character. And this also means that we could dash off of something and keep the momentum, like that. The only other changes I made were, 1, I added a cooldown timer in the UI, and actually you can see that probably already. Incredibly similar to dashing is sliding, and this is our sliding example. And you'll see it's in first person. We're kind of lucky, so we can kind of just copy paste stuff into our new character controller for this one. Here's what it looks like in the example. It's also worth noting that there's a ramp in this example, which would then lead you to believe, or at least lead me to believe, that you could slide down the whole thing, Apex Legends style. But no, it actually just stops you at some point. And this is how it looks on our character controller. We can sprint, and then we slide, and then we can keep moving. Boom. And actually, if we stop moving, you can see that it brings us to a halt because there's friction and stuff. So yeah, I tweaked a few values to my liking, and this is just what I feel like works the best. There is actually a little bit of what the kids would call tech. Oh, I removed the tech. You used to be able to just keep sliding and continually increase your momentum. Okay, it's important to know that there are a few types of movement abilities. There is one, input-driven abilities like walking, sprinting, crouching, and dashing, things that are started and stopped immediately when the player uses controls. Two is conditionally input-driven abilities like sliding. So these are triggered by an input, but requires the player to meet some condition. In the case of sliding, we need to be sprinting, and then when we start crouching, we will actually initiate a slide. And then three, the last ability type, is environmental abilities. So this is stuff like flying, swimming, climbing. Later we'll get gravities and man cannons and all this stuff. Later video, get subscribed. These abilities are conditionally triggered by the environment. So yes, they may require a little bit of interaction, say grabbing onto a ladder, but then the rest of the actual movement ability is determined by the environment itself. You stop climbing when you reach the end of the ladder. You only swim when you're in water, and in my case, you're only gonna fly if you're in a room that you can fly in, or an area you can fly in. Okay, rant over. All that really means is that we only need an is, a can, and an ing function for sliding. So swimming. I've been conveniently hiding the fact that all of these features, at least so far for this video, I built in the last prototype too. So I have a little bit of experience with them. The last movement ability that I will be adding in today, which I implemented in the last prototype, is swimming. Here's our swimming example. And one thing I noticed about it is it doesn't work. Yeah, it's kind of not great. I haven't touched this since I imported the package into the project. Luckily, I built this into the last prototype, as I already said, so I kind of understand how it's supposed to work. Swimming is a movement ability that replaces our walking movement, given that we are inside of a volume. So our start and stop are actually triggered by entering and exiting this volume. First, we're going to need to add a water volume, and I actually already had one in the prototype from last time. When we're in a water volume, walking inputs move us directionally depending on where our camera is looking. Jumping and crouching inputs will move us up and down. And I also have this pop-out mechanic. The example has the code for this pop-out mechanic, but again, the example wasn't working. So we can keep track of a depth value. If we have our player in here, that is horrible. Then we can keep track of our depth value to some level. And when this value decreases to a certain point, we can then launch the character up. And so that's what happens here. Once we hit a certain depth value, we actually shoot out. So when we pop out, that actually gives the player an opportunity to dash or jump again to more accurately choose where they want to land on the ground. Okay, so this isn't movement stuff, but I feel like I'm not going to have the opportunity to talk about it again, so I'm going to just quickly go over it now. I added a little oxygen bar, and you can see it on the screen right now. And while we are in the water, that oxygen bar depletes. When our player fully depletes of oxygen, they'll take damage on set ticks, so we will get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then eventually the player will die. And then we can respawn. I'm going to get into the health system and all the components that are necessary for it to work in a later video. So again, get subscribed. I have a lot of this already working, but I will get into the nitty-gritty of how it all works later. The last movement ability for today is flying. And I didn't have flying in the last prototype, but it is incredibly similar to swimming in the sense that it's started and stopped when we enter and exit a volume, and we hijack the controls in the same way. So the only difference between flying and swimming is any sort of movement friction parameters, as well as there's no oxygen bar thing. Here's the example that they have. At least this one works. When you hit space again while you're jumping, you do technically fly around. Yeah. And then if you hit the ground, you are suddenly walking again. It requires a button to press. And sort of just design decision wise, I want this to be very similar to swimming, just because I don't want the player to just be able to say use a jetpack. It might be worth it to implement that later. I'm not doing that yet. I want this to be very similar to swimming in the sense where, like, if the player was, say, in a space cruiser and then they hopped out of the space cruiser, they are suddenly flying. But if they went back in the space cruiser, there would be gravity. Okay? So the first thing that we need to do is actually set up a volume to fly within, to go in and out of. So I actually spent some time and I added to our map, and you can see that we have a flying room now. And so when we go in, you can see there's a little material to mark where it starts, but we can go in here. Exactly like swimming, we move around, hijacking that directional movement, our walking movement, and then if we press space, we go up, and crouch, we go down. There is no launch coming out. So I basically just stole all the code from the swimming ing function and left out the part that does the launch. So last little note, I set it up so that fall damage gets canceled when you're flying. So whenever you enter, stay in, or exit that volume, your falling damage gets canceled. That way you don't just die if you jump into the top of the fly zone and then you hit the bottom. That would be kind of dumb because you're going to slowly descend anyways. It doesn't really work like that. I also made it so that the same thing happens when you swim. So if you jump into water, that cancels your fall damage. I actually found a bug where the player could jump into the water off the back of the map, swim around to the front, and then as soon as they walked onto land, the fall damage mechanic would kick in and kill them because it was just based on the last walking position and the current walking position. On that note, next few videos are going to be on expanding these abilities and adding more of them, and then using them to make some demo maps. So get subscribed. If you like this video, like it. If not, I really don't know why you're still here. Comment if you have questions, music recommendations, comments about how many times I fixed my hair. You know the drill. Oh, and download my 2 games, Poke My Balls and Launch My Dog. They're on iOS and Google Play. Just go try them. I actually think you'd like them. So yeah, I'll see you next time. So, oh hey, you can see me in the script. Huh. Oh.